Good evening. Welcome once again to the series of talks being organized by Darsana on matters of public interest. Today, in our science and technology series, we look at opportunities for carbon neutral development in Kerala. This will be presented by Nidhin. Nidhin, after completing BTech in civil engineering from our college, went on to do his master's with specialization in environmental planning from School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. He started his career at Environment and Water Resource Engineering Division of Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. Subsequently, he worked with climate change team of an NGO called Tunnel in Wayanad on a pilot study on carbon neutral development at a panchayat level. He was with the Kerala State Disaster Management Authority, working as a hazard analyst at the State Emergency Operations Center. He was in the thick of action during the Kerala floods of 2018 and 19. Post-emergency recovery operation, he worked on vulnerability assessment and post-disaster recovery initiatives of Rebuild Kerala till January 2020. At present, he is working with climate change team of German development agency, that is GIZ India. Nidhin has numerous publications and is a regular presence in international conferences on topics related to carbon neutral development and building resilience to natural disasters. Today's webinar is hosted by Darsana. To know more about Darsana, please visit www.darsana.in. Follow our Facebook page. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel. So Nidhin would cover the subject in about 45 minutes, and then we can go on to the Q&A. So as he is speaking, you may please send your questions in the comment section. We will collate that and then ask the questions one by one to Nidhin. Thanks for listening, and Nidhin, over to you. You can start.
Thank you, Manojata, and thank you, Darsana, for this wonderful opportunity. I think this is my first time doing a webinar on Facebook Live, and I'll just straight away go into the presentation, and I'll try to switch to both Malayalam and English because my presentation is in English, but I'll try to speak it in Malayalam also. And as generously Manojatan has given me an introduction, I think my slides are visible.
Yeah, slides are visible. You can put it in presentation mode.
Yeah, so I will try to talk about climate change and how does climate change influences natural disasters and opportunities for low carbon development in Kerala. As Manojatan mentioned, I'm working with the German development agency. I'm working on the project called Strategic Partnerships for Implementation of the Paris Agreement. So it's totally related to the field I'm working right now. And like in Disaster Management Authority, we have been dealing with the disasters. Now we are trying to kind of prevent disasters due to climate change. So right now we are in 2020. Like if we rewind 4 or 5 years before, what was the scenario in 2015? I remember when I was doing my master's in Delhi, even working in Kerala, there was no, like we were not heard of any disasters, any natural disasters, not that frequently. Or even the State Disaster Management Authority, when I applied in 2016, I was not aware of such a government department in Kerala. Even though when we talk about climate change, the process of the phenomena of climate change will be conveyed in terms of the changes that we observe in the climate system for the past 30 years or 50 years on a long-term trend. But the impacts or the after results of climate change have been more evident or more frequent in last 4 to 5 years, or even we can say last 10 years. Like disasters or the extreme weather events are the most common evident outcome of climate change. When we come to Kerala context, sunstroke and heat related disasters have been more common than ever in the last couple of years. Even when we are having this discussion on climate change is because of the history of Kerala floods and the floods that happened in 2019, heat wave, coastal floods. Even though when we are talking now, there has been cases of coastal flooding in Chellanam and even in Veliyathura, in coastal areas of Trivandrum. Even the COVID-19 public health emergency is also can be related to climate change and the biodiversity loss that has been happening. Cyclones. I think Oki cyclone was the first cyclone that hit Kerala, and now cyclones and cyclonic storms are becoming more common even in Kerala and in Bay of Bengal. So if I quickly switch to Malayalam, ദുരന്തങ്ങൾ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ കേരള ഫ്ലഡ്സും ഒക്കെയാണ് നമുക്കിപ്പോൾ കാലാവസ്ഥ വ്യതിയാനത്തിനെ പറ്റി ഇങ്ങനെ ഒരു ചർച്ചയ്ക്ക് തന്നെ കാരണമാകുന്നത്. കാരണം കഴിഞ്ഞ 5 വർഷത്തിലാണ് നമ്മൾ ഫ്ലഡ്സ് ആണെങ്കിലും അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഇപ്പോൾ ചൂട് റിലേറ്റഡ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഇഷ്യൂസ് ആണെങ്കിലും നമ്മുടെ ഹെൽത്തിനെ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ നമ്മുടെ ലൈഫിനെ ബാധിക്കാൻ തുടങ്ങിയതിന് ശേഷമാണ് നമ്മൾ കാലാവസ്ഥ വ്യതിയാനത്തിനെ പറ്റി ചർച്ച ചെയ്യാൻ തുടങ്ങിയത്. ഇപ്പോ even the next 2 weeks we have a forecast of heavy rainfall in Kerala. I don't know, I'm not sure whether you can see the animation here in the screen. So if there is a low pressure or a cyclonic storm formation in Bay of Bengal or specifically near Orissa coast, that is going to influence the rainfall in Kerala. Because if you see that animation in the right side, that cyclonic storm will pull more rain clouds to Kerala coast. So that's how the climate system are becoming more vulnerable or more frequent of frequency of these extreme weather events. It's because of the imbalance that we created in the global climate systems. It's not any local issue, or it's not a state specific issue. It's a global challenge that we are dealing. Basically, the unpredictable nature or the unpredictability of monsoon is something that is bothering us a lot. Because if we have a very correct or a very precise warning message for a heavy rainfall event in any part of the Kerala, we can prepare ourselves for dealing with it. But when 2018 flood happened, because of the heavy torrential rainfall that happened for a very short duration of time, our geography cannot handle that amount of rainfall even if it happens over a short period of time. So again, the lack of precision in forecasting and even the changes in the monsoon pattern are after results of climate change. I will go into more details of scientific aspects of climate change and global warming and even the greenhouse gas effect. And even if we look at the casualties, human death due to these extreme weather events, landslides and the floods are causing more human fatalities. I think landslides are the most riskier than the floods. In 2019, the Kavalappara landslides and the landslides that happened in Wayanad are the ones that killed more people than the floods. Even in 2018, that was the case. Because for landslides, we are very less prepared, or we don't have that kind of system to alert people living in the landslide prone areas. അപ്പോ ഈ പറയുന്ന ലാൻഡ് സ്ലൈഡ്സിലാണ് ഏറ്റവും കൂടുതൽ നമുക്ക് മനുഷ്യജീവനുകൾ കഴിഞ്ഞ 2 കൊല്ലത്തിൽ നഷ്ടപ്പെട്ടത്. ഈവൻ that has a history of our development pattern also. Like നമ്മളൊക്കെ ഈ പറയുന്ന വെസ്റ്റേൺ ഗാർഡ്സിനെ കൂടുതലായിട്ട് ചൂഷണം ചെയ്ത് തുടങ്ങി, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ആ ഭാഗത്തേക്ക് വികസനം വന്നപ്പോഴാണ് ഈ പറയുന്ന പോലെ ലാൻഡ് സ്ലൈഡ് വൾണറബിലിറ്റിയും ഉണ്ടായത്. I will again go to what are the extreme weather events and its relation to climate change. Primary and direct events, or the primary and direct impacts of climate change in extreme weather patterns, are unpredictable rainfall pattern, as I said earlier, because we are experiencing torrential amount of rainfall for a very short duration of time. Like the rainfall that has to be occurred in a 1 month period, or for a season that is occurring in a 2 days of time. We are observing more number of dry days during the monsoon. Like it's like 1 week of rainfall in 1 day, and again the rest of 4 days are like without rainfall. And more drought and heat related health issues. Like in 2018 and 2019, where there were floods at the same time during the summer season, we were experiencing a lot of cases due to heat waves and sunstrokes. And in Kerala, State Disaster Management Authority had to declare heat waves, sunstroke as a state-specific calamity last year. Before that, it was not the case. And surprisingly, we are seeing the differences between the daytime temperature and nighttime temperature increasing a lot. Like the maximum temperature during the daytime is increasing, and the difference between the daytime temperature and nighttime temperature is increasing. And increased frequency of cyclonic activity in Arabian Sea is something that is bothering us a lot. We have been Arabian Sea and the Kerala coast has no history of cyclonic storms in the past 5-10 years. Now, even during the initial days of monsoon, we have been observing cyclones like Amphan hitting Mumbai coast and even a cyclone hitting Kolkata. So Arabian Sea is prone to more cyclonic activity recently. All this because of the surface temperature rise in oceans. And the secondary events or secondary climatic driven events due to climate change are diseases, epidemics, like now we are facing, or now we are going through the COVID crisis. And even the Nipah virus outbreak was an example of epidemic. That it's again a very indirect link because of the biodiversity loss in areas and drinking water shortage, even agriculture and livelihood loss. Kerala received a annual rainfall of around 3,000 millimeters, but again we face drinking water difficulties in many parts of the state during the summer months. And as a human being, we can easily adapt to very minute climate changes or very minute weather pattern changes. Even if it is a 1 degree Celsius rise in temperature, we can switch on the AC or we can switch on the fan and we can just easily adapt to the situation. But the biodiversity or the non-human beings in the ecosystem, like plants and other animal beings, are not they cannot easily adapt to the new situation. And as I said, landslides and mud flows, even the saline water intrusions are the secondary impacts of climate change and the global rise in the temperature. And this is the fossil fuel CO2 emissions for the past couple of years and the contribution of different countries. As you can see, it's on an increasing trend. Now also it's on an increasing trend. Like flattening the curve also applies to this graph. Like in COVID crisis, we have to flatten the curve by decreasing the number of patients. Like that, we have to kind of decrease this ever-rising graph of increasing fossil fuel CO2 emissions. So as I said, the climate extreme events are not a local specific or a not Kerala specific or an India specific event. It's been on an increasing trend globally. We heard about like California forest fires or even Amazon fires and the or bushfires in Australia or the melting polar caps in North Arctic and Antarctic region. This is an interesting infographic on 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees Celsius warming, global warming scenarios. As you can see, it just depicts all climate change impacts in a graphical manner. It compares a worse or worst situation because we have already made that damage. We have already emitted a lot of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So there is no going back. We can either deal with the worst condition or more worse condition in the future. So if the historic greenhouse gas emissions causes, or we continue the business as usual scenario, even after COVID, then there is going to be 2 degrees Celsius average global rise in temperature at the end of the century. And these are going to be the impacts. Like there will be 170% of increase in flood risk, and there will be species extinction, 18% of insects or 8% vertebrates, or many biodiversity loss is going to happen. And water availability is going to be impacted. Even sea level rise, 49 million people will be impacted by sea level rise. Even if we take the case of Kerala, the coastal belt of Kerala is the most populated region, or even the most crucial cities are also on the risk of sea level rise in Kerala. Even if it is Kochi or if it is Trivandrum, even if it is Kozhikode, all these cities are on this risk of sea level rise. And it's again a choice that we have to make today to kind of limit this risk or limit these impacts in the future. Coral bleaching and even the food security issues are also being discussed very relentlessly. Because as I said earlier, as a human being, we may adapt to the new situation by turning into the technological or infrastructure solutions, but the plants and the ecosystem or the human plants and animal ecosystems are not that flexible to adapt to the new situations. Like there will be an impact on the agriculture productivity, there will be impact. We can see a lot of documentaries on polar bears or even the Arctic regions where the melting ice caps is impacting their ecosystem. Even the marine ecosystem is very badly impacted. So food productivity also indirectly impacts the farmer community, and even the tribal population in the indigenous communities are also being impacted by rising temperatures. And so when we were working in Wayanad, like the previous infographic, we had to kind of convey the impacts of climate change to the common people. So we used a series of pictures to convey what is happening in their backyards, in the coffee plantations, in their homesteads, are also being impacted by rising temperatures. Coffee plantations or the coffee is a very thermosensitive crop, meaning coffee plantation requires a very very kind of subtle temperatures at different stages of its production and right amount of rainfall at the different stages of its formation. So it's a picture that is taken during the flowering season of the coffee, and then it's a kind of green beans will be formed after. So every stage it requires a particular amount of temperature and particular amount of rainfall. So that has been a trend, or coffee has been flourishing in Wayanad and the many parts of Idiki during past 10 to 20 years. Now there is a decrease or decline in the productivity of coffee plantations because of unpredictable rainfalls and changes in the temperature pattern. So after this stage, it becomes more red, matured coffee beans. And in many pockets, we have seen this kind of phenomena where in the same coffee plant, we can see both the flowers and the matured seeds. So this is the first step in a coffee life of a coffee bean. And you can see the both first step and the final step in the same plant. So maybe because of the untimely rainfall or the changes in the temperature pattern, the coffee plant itself got confused because it couldn't process which season it is to be. And similar examples we can see in a lot of cases. Even if we take the example of Kanikonna, during Vishu, maybe we have been experiencing summer early in February and even in March. So ഏപ്രിൽ പൂക്കേണ്ട കണിക്കൊന്ന് ചിലപ്പോൾ മാർച്ചിലും ഫെബ്രുവരിയിലൊക്കെ പൂക്കാറുണ്ട്. അതുപോലെ തന്നെ ഒരുപാട് എക്സാമ്പിൾസ് ഉണ്ട്. നമ്മുടെ ഈ പഴങ്ങൾ കായ്ക്കുന്നതാണെങ്കിലും അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അങ്ങനത്തെ നമുക്ക് തന്നെ ഒരുപാട് എക്സാമ്പിൾസ് കോട്ട് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റും. എങ്ങനെയാണ് കാലാവസ്ഥ വ്യതിയാനം ചെടികളിലും ഈവൻ പക്ഷികളിലെ ആ മാറ്റം ഒരുപാട് പഠനങ്ങൾ നടക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. പക്ഷികളുടെ ബ്രീഡിംഗ് പാറ്റേണിലും അവരുടെ മൈഗ്രേഷൻ പാറ്റേണിലും ഒക്കെ ഒരുപാട് ചേഞ്ചസ് ഈ പറയുന്ന പോലെ ക്ലൈമറ്റ് ചേഞ്ച് കൊണ്ട് ഉണ്ടാവുന്നുണ്ട്. ഈവൻ there is a kind of shift in many species of varieties of flowers also. ഇൻസെക്ട്സിലും ബട്ടർഫ്ലൈസിലും എല്ലാം ഇത്തരം ഇമ്പാക്ട്സിന്റെ സ്റ്റഡീസ് നടത്തുന്നുണ്ട്. വയനാട്ടിലും നമ്മൾ ഈ പറയുന്ന പക്ഷികളിലുള്ള ഇമ്പാക്ട്സിനെ പറ്റിയിട്ട് ഒരു പഠനം നടത്താൻ ശ്രമിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. അതായത് കാലാവസ്ഥ വ്യതിയാനം എങ്ങനെയാണ് പക്ഷികളുടെ ജനിതക മാറ്റത്തിനൊക്കെ കാരണമാവുന്നത് എന്നുള്ളതിനെ പറ്റി. അപ്പോൾ ഇതൊരു എക്സാമ്പിൾ ആണ്. ഇതുപോലത്തെ ഒരുപാട് എക്സാമ്പിൾസ് നമുക്ക് ചുറ്റിലുണ്ട്. അതിനെപ്പറ്റി കൂടുതൽ കാര്യങ്ങൾ കമന്റ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുമെങ്കിൽ കമന്റ് ചെയ്യാം, എക്സാമ്പിൾസ് ആയിട്ട് പറയാൻ പറ്റുന്നതാണെങ്കിൽ. എങ്ങനെയാണ് അപ്പോ ഈ പറയുന്ന ഗ്രീൻ ഹൗസ് എഫക്ട് ഉണ്ടാവുന്നത്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഗ്ലോബൽ വാർമിംഗ്, ഹൗ ഡസ് ദിസ് ഗ്ലോബൽ വാർമിംഗ് ഹാപ്പൻസ്? സോ വി ഹാവ് എ നാച്ചുറൽ ഗ്രീൻ ഹൗസ് layer or natural greenhouse gas effect that is being happening even before humans came into the picture. So that natural greenhouse effect is the basic reason of our ease of survival in Earth. So that warmth is actually keeping life in Earth. So, but that natural warming effect is being enhanced by the human anthropogenic greenhouse emissions post-industrial revolution. there has been a haphazard increase in the in the greenhouse gas emissions. Like greenhouses include heat. Like greenhouse gases are the heat trapping gases like carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide that emits from our developmental activities like industries or even transport, even energy generation. Basically, the fossil fuel industry. Even so, the fossil fuel industry took a main central stage after the industrial revolution, right? So the cumulative effect of heat trapping gases in the atmosphere enhances the greenhouse impact on the earth. So there has been a gradual increase in the global average temperature, and eventually it's not only the global warming. So you may think that if it is a global warming, then the temperature only will rise. But how does other phenomena or other extreme weather events happen? So it creates an imbalance in the global climate systems. And even the rising temperature in the surface of the sea also fuels the cyclonic circulation or the cyclonic storms in the oceans. So it's an imbalance that is being created by the human development or the greenhouse gas emissions by our activities. So again, if you look at the natural carbon cycle that we study during our school days, so there has been a natural process of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through the very basic photosynthesis that plants absorb carbon dioxide and release oxygen. And similarly, the soil also absorbs carbon dioxide, and forest is a very good example of carbon sequestration. So there has been a natural cycle where the carbon emissions happens and the carbon removals happens by natural means. Oceans also take up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Basically, the ocean bed ecosystem or the marine ecosystem helps in removing the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So this has been a very balanced system for many centuries. Then after industrial revolution, when we started emitting more and more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, this system become a imbalanced system, or there has been many changes in the natural rhythm or the natural carbon cycle. So again, when we look at the carbon sequestration and the greenhouse gas emissions, just to link to the previous, like international protocols or international standards to calculate greenhouse gas emissions in different sectors. So transportation sector, energy sector, industries, we call it as agriculture and other land use changes or livestock, and the waste sector. Similarly, there is a natural carbon removal happening through oceans or the trees outside forests or the forest and plantation, and the organic carbon sequestration in the soil. So this has been calculating greenhouse gases or the calculating carbon is something basic foundation of international climate change negotiations. So I'll come into that. And before that, I'll just give a basic outline of the presentation. So now I'm talking about more about global warming and even how does our activities impact or our activities influence climate change through greenhouse gas emissions. And then we will look at more Kerala specific vulnerabilities or more Kerala specific solutions for mitigating these impacts or adapting to climate change. What are the solutions for or way forward for Kerala? So like I mentioned, GHG emissions and global warming. So we all play a part in this global phenomenon of climate change. So there is a term called carbon footprint. I am sure that most of you are familiar with the carbon footprint term. That actually helps us to kind of quantify our ecological impact on Earth. So I have a carbon footprint for each and every activity that I do. Like for an year or for a day, what is the carbon footprint of my life or my activities on Earth? Similarly, the countries also calculate their greenhouse gas emissions for an annual basis. And how does we calculate or how does we measure our carbon footprint? So basically, it involves calculating the amount of carbon emissions from each activity. Like for example, if you take transportation, I'm not taking an individual carbon footprint, I'm taking a regional or a national level carbon footprint. So the sectors that I mentioned earlier, the transportation sector, the number of vehicles, number of fossil fuel vehicles, or and its annual consumption of fuels and its emission from the transportation that involves the carbon dioxide emissions and the nitrous oxide emissions. And then we calculate the total annual emissions based on the certain calculations. And even in energy sector, how much fossil fuels are used for power generation, like thermal power plants, and even coal fuel power plants, and even we have a very minimum emissions from hydel power plants. And similarly, the industrial activities, we can say a lot of industrial activities. So there are methodologies for calculating, measuring greenhouse gas emissions, and there is a conversion of very different greenhouse gases into a common carbon footprint. And even from waste, from burning of plastic waste, or even from landfills, the methane gas emits from the landfills. So similarly, we can also calculate the carbon removals through these three sectors, like oceans and even forest. If 1 hectare of tropical rainforest is there, how much will be the carbon sequestration? So these are the calculation methodologies or the mathematical calculations present. And even in the organic carbon sequestration, we have a very fixed methodology for calculating the carbon sequestration in soil. So when we talk about climate change, it's not, as I said, it's not a national issue or it's not a state level issue. We have been facing the repercussions of climate change because of it's a very global, like I said before, so we have to get a basic idea of the global politics that happen over, or that is happening over climate change issues. So it's I'm sure that most of you know the Paris Agreement, that treaty signed in 2015. United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change is the governing body that it's just like a global government or international government that that's dealing with the climate change negotiations between the countries. So there is a huge debate between developed countries and the developing countries, and least developed countries and the small island countries. So it's like developed countries versus developing countries, and along with least developed countries and small island countries. So small island countries has a very survival question, because every degree of rise in temperature is kind of taking their land. They have been kind of submerging, or they have been losing their own land, and their survival is under question. And least developed countries and developing countries cannot, or not in a position to invest more money or their economic activity in terms of a climate responsive, or they cannot focus more on climate action because they have very basic development needs of their citizens in the question. So the whole international debate is like developed countries should help developing countries and least developed countries in terms of financial means and in terms of technological transfer. And so the Paris Agreement kind of makes sure that the developed countries are helping these developing or transitioning economies in terms of finance and in terms of technologies. So social inequality is also a kind of vulnerability layer that makes this all debates more complex, because there is always even the COVID crisis exposed the social inequality that is being present in our societies for the past so many years. So there is global social inequality, like there are developed and very rich countries and there are poor countries. And when we look at the Indian context, there are like developed and very rich states and there are poorer states. So if we take the case of Kerala, we are a very well settled state with a very high indices of human development and even low level of poverty, low level of hunger, low level of. So Kerala is a very well developed state within India. But again, social inequality is there in the demography. Like there are poor sections of the society and there are richer society. So when does this social inequality does matter? It's basically whenever a disaster hits, whenever some kind of survival questions comes, the richer people or the more financially stable people can easily adapt to or easily kind of bounce back from that disaster. We have seen this many times in many scenarios, like even the COVID crisis. If we take the COVID is also it's a more kind of a survival question for the poorer sections of the society. Even if we can quote the example of the migrant laborers issue that happened during the initial days of the lockdown, when they had to travel back to their villages because there is no survival in the cities anymore, there are no jobs. And even we can see it in nationally, regionally, and within Kerala also we can see this social inequality issues. So poverty is increasing the vulnerability, and there is a gender lens to this vulnerability issues, because women and children are more susceptible to the impacts of climate change, and our action plans should be more focused or more biased in terms of gender and even in terms of socioeconomic vulnerability. So I think I'm trying to make this kind of complexities in the climate change debate more clear. So it's basically if you have access to the resources, you are more safe, and if you are more adaptable to the changing scenarios. That's it. So this kind of a infographic that depicts the whole global debates. Like we have already in the verge of exploiting the balance of greenhouse gas carbon budget, we call it a carbon budget, where we can actually emit more carbon for our development activities. So if this vessel is like in our atmosphere, we have already reached the brink of the vessel, that we have already consumed the carbon budget, or we have already consumed the space that or reached that level of saturation. So there is a natural carbon sink in the bottom that removes the carbon from the atmosphere through the natural processes, as I mentioned in the earlier slides. But that removal is very minimum or very low removals that happens naturally. And we have this balanced carbon budget that's a core area of debate between the developed countries and developing countries. So developing countries argues that we have the right to develop, and we should have more carbon budget or carbon space in the global scenario because we have to meet the developmental needs. So developed countries again argue, or you can you may familiar with the US being pulled off from Paris Agreement because Donald Trump believes that he this whole climate change debate is not real or not scientific, and that makes more financial burden on the people of America, and it's again bullshit. And so we have possibility of two actions: to either to reduce the emissions or to enhance the carbon removal from the atmosphere, either through artificial carbon sinks or by protecting existing natural carbon sinks, and again increasing the natural removal from atmosphere. So there are a lot of debates over artificial carbon sinks because there are a lot of carbon removal technologies that is being discussed in other developed parts of the world. So we come to the solutions part. Till now we have discussed all the extreme weather events or the disasters that is being occurring due to climate change, and the science of climate change. How does greenhouse gas emissions are contributing to global warming, and how does it destabilizes the climate system. So now we come to solutions, or we come to the aspects that we actually can do now. So carbon neutral development or net zero emissions is something that came into debate from the Paris Agreement. So in 2015, when the Paris Agreement got signed or got agreed upon, the countries decided to take a net zero emission development trajectory. Like what we say, every future projects or future developmental activities will follow a net zero path. The anticipated emissions will be offset by either from within that developmental activity, or additional carbon offsets will be generated by investing in more renewable technologies or investing in similar projects in the developing countries. So there is a global carbon markets and carbon trading markets that happen in parallel or in a simultaneous manner, where we trade emissions or emission reductions for money. So I'm not going into details of that. It's just carbon neutrality or the net zero emissions means just try to balance the natural rhythm of carbon cycle. So future development will be following a carbon neutral path like earlier before pre-industrial revolution period. So the international climate change negotiations basically talk about the emission reduction targets for countries. So they keep higher targets for developed countries or more ambitious targets for already economically well settled countries. India has also committed to Paris Agreement and many emission reduction targets. So we have a national action plan on climate change at the national level, and nationally determined contributions we say as emission reduction targets to the International Paris Agreement. Similar to National Action Plan on Climate Change, we have State Action Plan on Climate Change in every states of India. So similarly, Kerala was also prepared a State Action Plan on Climate Change back in 2014. That has not been updated till now. And so we are still dealing with the 2014 State Action Plan on Climate Change. But because ironically, after that report or that policy document, we have been witnessing a series of extreme weather events and a series of disasters, and there is a very urgent need of updating that document now. So nationally determined contributions are like more targets in solar energy, renewable energy, and even emission reductions in the economy, and even enhancing existing carbon sinks or the carbon removals in the atmosphere. So basically, what we are trying to do is that decoupling these greenhouse gas emissions from the economic growth. So basically, that is the understanding, or that is the traditional development pattern that we have seen. Whenever there is an economic growth or a development activity happens, there is an eventual contribution to the greenhouse gas emissions. So we have to decouple these two phenomena. Like we need economic growth, at the same time we should not contribute to the greenhouse gas emissions. So that is the core or the foundation or the fundamental idea behind carbon neutrality, setting a net zero target. Setting a net zero target again goes to sector wise and the regional wise targets that I will discuss in detail in the coming slides. So now we are coming to the Kerala context. Because as I said, there is an urgent need of revising the existing state action plan on climate change, because that is the key policy document that is going to drive the climate action initiatives in Kerala. That has to address different varieties of vulnerabilities of the state. We may have to look at, we don't know at present, we don't know which parts of the state is more vulnerable to climate change. So that is going to be a guiding document for our climate action activities, or even climate resilient development agenda that is being discussed here. So we have a state disaster management plan for Kerala, and that is being updated now. And we have district disaster management plans where we have the vulnerability maps in terms of the natural disasters, but not from a climate change perspective. And we should have this integrated climate and hazard vulnerability assessment at the local self-government level. So what KSDMA or the government of Kerala right now doing is that we are downscaling it to the local panchayat level disaster management plans, community-centric or the people-centric strategies for adapting to disasters. Because we know that whenever a disaster or a flood or a landslide happens in our neighborhood, it will be the first person to reach to the site will be the ward member or the local people in our neighborhood. So we must be aware of the vulnerability or in our neighborhood. So a state level plan or a state level or it is even a district level map doesn't help local level actions. So we need again, we need a community civil defense or the rapid response team, and a carbon neutral or a low carbon development at the local level. So Meenangadi Panchayat, or there are a lot of successful models in terms of local level initiatives for adapting to climate change. And as I said earlier, we need to strengthen our alert system, because nowadays we hear about yellow alert, orange alert, and red alerts. But again, now these alerts are being issued for a district. We don't know which parts of the district will be impacted more. So we need kind of a local level alert warnings. So this panchayat level disaster management plans, or that activity, that community based adaptation activity, is called Nammal Namukkai. It's just it's just translate to like that togetherness, that togetherness of Malayali community is the strength, core strength, even in any disasters, whether it's floods, whether it's COVID. That people centric approach, or that collectiveness was always been the key for fighting these disasters. So that's why it named as a Nammal Namukkai. That activity is under progress now. I think a lot of panchayats have already prepared their disaster management plans, and we have to do the capacity building of vulnerability communities, and we should adopt many ecosystem based climate change adaptation. When I say ecosystem based climate change adaptation, it's basically there are communities that their lives and livelihood linked to their linked to their neighboring ecosystems, like fishermen community or even the tribal communities in the Western Ghats. Their livelihood is directly linked to the immediate surrounding. So we cannot replace them for any developmental activities. So we have to ensure that they are safe in their neighborhood, and they are getting access to their routine livelihood activities. So that is the basic idea behind the ecosystem based climate change adaptation. So we have to again look at the long term, short term, and the medium term solutions for reducing their risk from climate change impacts. I will again take the example of Chellanam and Veliyathura, or where this coastal flooding or the coastal erosion has happening a lot. So the engineering solutions, or constructing a seawall, is a very temporary or a very unsustainable solution. We need to kind of, either we have to rehabilitate them, or we have to kind of provide a long-term sustainable solution like mangroves or offshore tidal breakers. And even if we consider the tribal communities in the Western Ghats, we have to ensure that they are safe from landslides, like that. So whenever we talk about Kerala's vulnerability, we always say Kerala is a very multi-hazard prone state. Because if you look at these two maps, the right one, the yellow patches denotes the flood vulnerable areas in Kerala, and the thick red or the dark red in the left side map shows the landslide vulnerable areas. And geographically, we are in a very multi-hazard prone state. There are places where both risk of landslides and floods, and there is a thin line of showing the coastal vulnerability also. So these patches are all vulnerable to coastal erosion and the coastal flooding. So we live in a state where there are multiple hazards that can occur. There is a seismic vulnerability also, like we comes under seismic zone 3. So an earthquake is also possible in Kerala. Yeah. So as I said, we had state level flood vulnerability and state level disaster maps, and the district level hazard vulnerability map till last year. So this map shows the Thrissur flood vulnerability map, but I can't locate my home or my hometown in this map, even though it shows the taluk boundaries. I cannot locate my neighborhood in this map, in this district level map. So that's why we came up with the panchayat level disaster maps, where we can actually locate my house. I can easily locate my place in that map, where I can check whether my house or my friends and family live in a flood prone area. So whenever there is an alert message, there is an cautious message, and then I can make sure that my friends and family are prepared to kind of evacuate the place if there is a flooding happens. So basically, we need this kind of local level data for better understanding and better preparation. So this is a mitigation aspect. Like this is something very short-term thing that we have to do. We have to make sure that our life and livelihood is protected. So this is something that has been doing in the past 1 year or past 2 years, because we were not in a, like we we were not familiar with the floods or landslides like this before, even 5 years before. So this is a mitigation aspect, reducing the loss and damage from the disasters and from climate change. But we have to look at the long-term action plans, because this is going to be more frequent and this is going to be more recurring in coming years. I think I'm slightly running out of time, so I'll just rush now. Like I explained before, the ecosystem-based adaptation and ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction that will ensure the livelihood opportunities for the communities and carbon sequestration also. So I'll talk about the long-term action plans in the next slide. So I think this is the expected scenario, or the ideal scenario that we all dream of in Kerala or in any parts of the world. So we have to make sure that our electric vehicles are on road with many minimum emissions, and we have a very cleaner sources of electricity and energy. So again, it depends on the informed decision making process for the development policies. So when we discuss the infrastructure projects or multi-million projects in Kerala, we have to kind of take a informed decision whether it's going to benefit me on a long term or benefit the state on a long term basis. So that will come to the sectoral policies, because when we discuss high-speed railway corridors in Kerala, or when we discuss fourth or fifth airport in Kerala, it again we have to kind of take a informed decision whether it's going to benefit me on a long term. So how do we measure, or how do we quantifiably assess or compare different options? So there comes the importance of GHG emissions, or the carbon neutrality, or the net zero concepts. So I'll go in more details. So when we look at the sector-wise aspects, so again, this kind of an ideal scenario is not economically feasible right now. The electric cars or the electric mobility that we talk about, e-mobility policy in Kerala, electric cars are not cheap. Even when we talk about electric cars, we should ensure that this electricity is being generated from a cleaner source of electricity. So at present, we don't have that amount of infrastructure, or that kind of infrastructure where we can ensure that electricity for electric cars are from a renewable source. And again, if we look at the solar, if I have to make my home solar powered electricity, I have to invest more on the solar cells or solar panels, and even on the batteries. So we have to always look at the economic feasibility of climatic solutions, financial aspects. If solar is cheaper, definitely people will opt solar. And if electric cars are cheaper than the diesel cars, definitely we will switch to electric cars. So it's again the economic feasibility. Now solar becoming more cheaper, or the electric mobility is being more mainstream. There are a lot of subsidies for electric cars. Then this will become more community acceptable solutions. So initially I was planning to speak in Malayalam, but there are certain terms that we don't have the Malayalam translation for those terms, even for mitigation adaptation. I don't know the Malayalam words for that. So when we talk about improving the resilience of the people, or improving the resilience of the communities, we come to the concept of self-sufficiency in terms of agriculture, food productivity, and even energy. We depend a lot on thermal power plants outside Kerala for electricity from the central grid. And for agriculture also, we have been depending on the neighboring states for vegetables and fruits. So at the initial days of lockdown, our chief minister deliberately asked us to produce our own vegetables in our backyards. So that's where the whole idea of self-sufficiency, or the Subiksha Keralam campaign that is being running now. So now I'm trying to come to very specific solutions, or what are the specific aspects that we have to consider in terms of a more resilient or a climate neutral Kerala is concerned. So that Subiksha Keralam campaign is something that focuses on the self-sufficiency in terms of food security. And energy, in terms of energy, we have to make sure that our homes are off-grid solar powered homes. And energy efficiency is a very important aspect because we have to retrofit existing electric appliances in the homes. So energy efficiency, we had a very successful campaign in replacing old filament bulbs with the CFL earlier. Now it's been again replaced by LEDs. So there has been a huge technological advance in terms of energy efficiency. But we have to more enhance the existing energy efficiency or the retrofit existing buildings. And I think the previous Darsana webinar was exclusively on energy sector. That's why I'm not going into details. People can always refer to the previous presentation by Suresh sir, where he had talked more detail in energy self-sufficiency in Kerala or energy security in Kerala. I'll just touch upon the transportation sector a bit because we have been discussing e-mobility very frequently last couple of days because there are a lot of controversies. And again, so this e-mobility, we have to ensure that electricity is from off-grid renewable electricity, because if it is again putting load on the existing grid, then that makes no sense, right? And we have to promote mass public transport. There are initial discussions going on water metro, and we have to strengthen existing private bus services in Kerala or in cities of Kerala. Now again, we all know that private buses are on a strike now because of COVID situation and low ridership and the fear in people taking buses. So COVID crisis already put a pressure on the public transport systems in everywhere in the world. So again, we have to discuss whether we have to decongest our existing roads or we have to go for widening of roads or more over bridges. Because if we consider the trend of number of private vehicles, there has been an increasing trend, and we cannot build roads forever. So again, construction of roads are very kind of carbon intensive. We have to kind of go for aggregates. We have to kind of go for quarries for rocks and for fine aggregates. So we have to take an informed decision whether we have to decongest existing roads or we have to again go for more roads and more overbridges. So there is a concept called transit oriented development where we can limit our day-to-day activities into the place where we have access to public transport. And again, when we talk about multi-million infrastructure projects in Kerala, I don't know how our ecosystem or our geographical situation favors this kind of a multi-million high-speed railway project or airport. I'm not putting out any kind of a final judgment here, but it's open to discussion. So when we look at the electric vehicle policy of Kerala, it's a very ambitious, very future-forward policy, where we try to by 2020, it's already 2020, but by 2022 or by next couple of years or next 5 years, we are trying to introduce more two-wheelers or more three-wheelers into electric transition, and we have to make sure that this electricity is also from a cleaner source. When we look at the waste management sector, so there are a lot of initiatives under Shujitva Mission happening, and there is again a state level debate over centralized waste management and a decentralized waste management systems. We have seen a lot of failure examples of centralized waste management systems in case of Vilappinchala or any other centralized facility in Kochi, where we try to collect all waste from households and even from markets to a single point, and then try to burn it or try to kind of dump it in a place. So shall we go for a decentralized waste management practices that's already proven successful in cities like Alappuzha and Trivandrum, where we take responsibility for our own waste? So Shujitva Mission has been the central mission that's driving all these waste management campaigns in Kerala. So if we do composting of our own organic waste in our backyards, we can also improve the organic carbon sequestration in the soil. That again, in turn, kind of benefit the productivity of agriculture produce in the soil. And there is another option of going for biogas that again kind of balances or reduces the domestic energy demand. So we have a successful model of decentralized waste management in the system, or the source segregated system in the state. So we should try to kind of scale up that best practices rather than going for a centralized waste management facility where there will be transportation of waste involved and again a more carbon intensive issue. So all these aspects can be measured or assessed in terms of the emissions or the carbon removal potential capacities. So livelihood options, or we have to make or create more jobs in these sectors, technological innovations in renewable energy sector or in waste management. I know, I personally know a lot of startups working in these sectors where we try to kind of bring in more technological solutions that will enhance all these ongoing activities and scaling up of already existing practices in the state. There are a lot of local self-governments in Kerala that is being doing a commendable job in different aspects of this carbon neutral development. And we have to kind of ensure that this knowledge is being exchanged between the local self-governments. And Harita Kerala Mission is being doing a wonderful job for the past couple of years and for the past 4 years in Kerala in terms of rejuvenating our existing water sources or the or enhancing paddy cultivation in the state. And even you can see these figures. And so in every on every environment day we plant a lot of trees, or we planned that plantation is going plantation drives happen on environment day and in many cases. But where are we doing this monitoring of all these things? Like how can we measure the emission reductions from each initiatives? Like if I planned 1 acre or 1 hectare of Miyawaki forest, how much is the carbon sequestration that will happen over the next 5 years? So we have to kind of do this calculations in terms of carbon offset. So if we take the example of Cochin International Airport Limited, CIAL, which is totally fully powered by solar, and can we make or can we say that that's a carbon neutral airport? Uh, we cannot say like we have to assess it in terms of carbon removals or the carbon emissions that happens over in a daily operation of flights. So that may not be a carbon neutral airport, but that airport is fully powered by solar and it's again contributing, like generating more electricity than they consume. So that's a very successful model in Kerala, but there are a lot of location advantages for that airport. They have a very large area or huge amount of land resources for facilitating solar power generation. But when we try to market or when we try to publish that initiative as a climate change action, then only we got recognition from UNEP and other international organizations. So again, I'm putting up certain questions in front of the audience, like where we should go for nature-based solutions or engineering solutions, investment before a disaster or a recovery and rebuilding investment, people-centric policy interventions, or in the multiple levels of governance. I'll just speak about the investment before a disaster and recovery and rebuilding cost, because even after every floods or even after every landslides, we get a lot of central finance assistance or international funding help in terms of recovery or rebuilding process. But we, the investment in terms of pre-disaster or in the preparatory phase, it's very less. What we can do as an individual, we should relook into our choices, consuming pattern, and we should demand for change. Even if you take the present EIA notification or the youth climate action movements across the globe, so these are something that we can do at an individual level. So these are some cartoons to depict, like we have very like a lot of international conferences on climate change, but again the survival of our own ecosystems are in question. Yeah, so it's again a Paris Agreement cartoon. So I'll just end it with a quote from Greta Thunberg, which says that nobody is too small to make a difference. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Manoj. So there are a lot of.
Yeah, thanks, Nidhin. So I think it was it was an interesting presentation, and definitely you brought out two aspects of climate change. One is the development aspect, and the other one is, of course, the disaster part as to how it is impacting people. And more importantly, I think overall the impact on the ecosystem, because human beings, based on various, human beings still have a means of adapting to these disastrous changes, but the ecosystem around them cannot adapt the way the climate is changing, as was clear with the confused blooming and seeding patterns in plants, or the cartoon that you showed about the polar bear. So those are all clear indications of where we are heading. And like what you rightly said, I don't think we would be seriously even doing a 1-hour webinar on this if we ourselves didn't go through the 2018 and 19 disasters that we saw. So we have quite a few questions. So probably I'll read out one by one. Maybe I'll ask, I'll start by asking one question myself. So there's a lot of controversy in the light of the last two floods about removing sand from river, because there's one argument that with the landslides and all that, the rivers are now full of sand, and they have to be removed, without which it leads to further breaching of the banks. So that's, and in fact there are also protests organized by local parties to get this removed. So so at a holistic level, I think we argue that sand mining destroys the rivers, but then at a very localized level, does it have any, does this argument have any sanctity at all, that we have to keep cleaning up the rivers and so that they don't breach the banks?
Yeah, so I'll just start answering that question by taking the examples of our reservoirs, because I think our dead storage in a reservoir, or the silting that happens in the reservoirs during monsoon season, or during the with the cumulative effect of landslides that happens in the catchment area of a reservoir. So that argument, or that point, is a very valid question regarding desilting our existing reservoirs and using that silt for any constructive purposes. I don't think desilting of rivers should be the main focus, but protection of the river banks, or conserving the river banks, should be the main focus. Because if we allow the natural flow of water in the river, then that desilting happens on its own. It's a natural process that will happen. But if we encroach the river banks, or if we do any illegal or any construction activities in the river banks, it's again going to take a hit. I can quote an example of a KSRTC depot in Cherutoni town, where we were not opening the Idiki Dam for centuries, like 25 years, 30 years. It happened in 2018 only. So we started constructing, or we started encroaching the river bed or the floodplain. So that creates more issue, or that creates more survival issue than removing silt from the river. But yeah, removing silt from the reservoirs is very important, because that will eventually reduce the capacity in the reservoirs if siltation happens more in the reservoir. So I think rather than going for desiltation in the rivers, it's preventing encroachments in the rivers and siltation in the reservoirs is more important.
Okay, thanks. So so let me get on to the questions that we have received from the audience. So first one is, I think, this question was covered. Like, the question is just, did you cover change in land utilization? I think you had covered it briefly. Maybe in subsequent questions we can come back to that. So the other one is from Biju K. So he asks, what is the present development in carbon sequestration in India? My organization, NALCO, has started a carbon sequestration pilot project using
I think I'm having... I think I'm having a connectivity issue, Manoj. I lost you in between. Am I audible now?
Yes, I mean, you're audible.
But I lost you in between. I think Archimalik was also saying that you're not audible. Can you repeat that question, please?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I think probably it was something to do with my internet. Anyway, I'll repeat the question. So basically, the question is about the carbon sequestration status in India. So question is from Biju. He's asking whether there are any serious attempts for this. He's quoting his own organization, which is NALCO, which is a pilot project using microalga. So are there similar serious efforts, or yeah, what is your opinion on that?
So that's a very thriving, what we say, thriving economy or thriving opportunistic scenario where if we have a carbon removal solution, even if it is an algal solution or any kind of a technological solution to remove carbon dioxide or enhancing the carbon sequestration, then there are a lot of international potential or very immense potential even in India. If you, he was asking about the Indian context. India has already set a target of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere 1.5 trillion tons through afforestation programs like planting more forests and planting more, enhancing the existing forest. So India is currently not looking at the technological solutions for carbon removal. Like there are very intensive, financial intensive solutions like mechanical forests or artificial forests where they can remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through a technological process, or even BECCS, carbon capture and storage in the geo beds. So if a startup or if an business model that comes up with a solution to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, then that has a huge potential in India.
Okay, so maybe I think there are a lot of questions, so you can keep the answers a little brief. The next question is from Dinesh I. So his question is on electric vehicles. So he's asking whether moving to electric vehicles creates any major advantage, because finally electricity is produced using fossil fuels. So that's his question. So let me add on to that by also saying that the e-vehicles would also use lithium-ion based batteries. And lithium-ion definitely is not a environment-friendly option. So, and I mean, from whatever limited reading I've done, I've seen that in China they already have a huge problem of disposal of
disposing these batteries.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
So e-mobility is not a final solution, but that's something that that is something that an immediate solution, switching from the fossil fuel diesel cars or petrol cars. Because when we look at the emissions in India or even in Kerala, around 50% of emissions are from the transportation sector, from the existing diesel fleets or from the existing petrol cars, and major portion is from energy sector. So switching to e-vehicle or e-mobility is a immediate solution or a short-term solution that we have in front. But we should make sure that this electricity is not from the grid, not from the existing grid. We should make sure that this is from an off-grid renewable source of electricity that I have tried to mention in the presentation as well. Again, coming on to your question of sustainability of lithium-ion batteries, yes. If again if we account the carbon footprint of solar panels or the lithium-ion batteries, most of them are imported from China or many cheap producing countries. So if we develop some technology for making it in locally, or even come up with an technological innovative solution to an action plan to kind of disposal of lithium-ion batteries or any long-term sustainable plans. That's why we have to look at the life cycle impact of these solutions. Again, that will come to the informed policy decisions that we are talking about. But if we compare the diesel vehicles or the electric vehicles, yes, electric vehicles are the near-time solution for reducing emissions from transport sectors.
Okay. So the next question is already answered. So this was a question from Manish. He was asking what are the sustainable development initiatives happening in Kerala. I think you covered it in your slides. So there are a couple of questions related to hydel power. So one is from Gopi Krishnan, and there's another one from Harindranath. So basically, Gopi's question is there a calculation of carbon footprint of cost because of deforestation for hydel plant? So that's one part of the question. Hari's question is a little kind of a corollary to it, asking, is hydel plant a good energy option, considering that it's the carbon footprint is lower? So how do you kind of balance it out, like the increase in carbon footprint because of deforestation versus going for fossil fuel based power generation? So do you have any scientific understanding or studies to back these comparisons?
Yeah, so I think most of us are familiar with the case study of Bhutan. Bhutan claiming to be the first carbon neutral country or the carbon positive country in the world. So Bhutan's energy source is basically from the hydropower. So they claim that hydropower is a carbon neutral energy source. So if we look at the existing hydropower projects, we have a very limited capacity or very limited contribution from hydropower. But if we go for new hydropower projects, and if it contributes to the deforestation, and not only from deforestation, but the forest area or the ecosystem being submerged by construction of a reservoir will make more methane emissions from the submerged organic matter. So yes, there are technical methodologies for accounting the greenhouse gas emissions from the hydel project, even considering the lifetime cycle, long-term life cycle analysis, where we look at the amount of power generated from a hydrologic project and comparing it with the amount of emissions that will cause during the construction, during the operation, and during the maintenance of that hydel power project. So one thing I have to make it clear is that not only from the deforestation, but also from the submergence of the organic matter during the construction of the reservoir will also contribute to the methane emissions from degrading of that organic matter underwater, also contributes to the emissions. Yeah, but hydropower is also considered to be a cleaner source of energy. But if we can adopt, I think Kerala had a small hydropower policy where we can adopt hydropower without a reservoir. If we can generate electricity from a running water, I think there was some discussions and there was some innovative ideas coming up where we can generate electricity from a running water source. But I'm not favoring the large scale reservoirs and large scale hydropower projects. But yeah, we have to look at the innovative solutions for that.
Yeah, so what that means is there's no clear answer, because in the last webinar, we kind of stretched for 3 hours debating on this because
yeah, it's a never-ending debate. But I think again, if you look at the carbon footprint or the carbon emissions of solar power generation and the long-term sustainability, I think Suresh sir made it clear in the previous webinar also. If we import solar panels from China, or even if we consider the carbon footprint of manufacturing of a solar panel, and then it's going to be huge. But I think Kerala has a potential for small hydropower where we can generate electricity without a construction of a large-scale reservoir. But because deforestation is a carbon bomb, we call it as a carbon bomb. Even deforestation or a forest fire is a carbon bomb, where a huge amount of carbon is released that has been stored over the last many centuries in the forest. So it's no deforestation or encroaching forest area is a no solution for a sustainable development. Again, we have to kind of we have to do that comparative analysis of long-term benefits and in terms of emissions and emission reductions.
Okay, so I mean, like your answer clearly tilts towards no large dams or no submergence, reservoir-based dams.
Yes.
But yeah, of course, in the last presentation, the run-of-the-way plant again was clubbed along with non-conventional energy source because it's again seasonal. It's again like, anyway, we'll not go there. But yeah, I think there's a
I think there were pilot scale experiments in Banasura Saga where they experimented the floating solar panels over an existing reservoir. There are areas where we can always explore where we can integrate hydropower and with the alternative non-conventional energy sources. Yeah.
Okay. So the next question is from Munir. The question is, how effective is the predictive emission monitoring, which is approved by US EPA to control carbon emission in oil and gas industry?
Predictive emission inventory.
Predictive emission monitoring, which is approved by US EPA.
Because I'm not, frankly, I'm not familiar with this predictive emission inventory by US EPA, because we always follow inter-panel government IPCC guidelines and the UNFCCC guidelines for emission inventory, because that is the globally accepted methodology for accounting emissions. Because we have to make sure that everyone in the across the globe follows the same methodology, so that we can always compare with the emissions of my activity and with that of a person in America. So US EPA is not the scientific organization for predictive, like for suggesting a methodology for accounting carbon emissions or any greenhouse gas emissions. So I suggest to look at the IPCC guidelines. I think now we have a 2009 guidelines where we can actually look at the emissions from oil and gas industry from a globally accepted research methodology. Right? So I would suggest to go for the IPCC methodology rather than going for US EPA. Because what happens in a national specific methodology is that they may have their own regional specific emission factors and we cannot compare it with any other global case studies. Yeah. So I think.
Okay. Yeah, fine. So the next question is from Pradeep. Is there any target date fixed by Kerala government to become a carbon neutral or a negative state?
Frankly, no. As you know, there's no kind of a target or not even a kind of a policy that is being planned, because as I said in the presentation, we even don't have a state action plan on climate change that is updated till now. So we have only a first edition of climate action plan that is discussed in 2014. Am I audible? I think there is some connectivity issues.
No, you're audible. I mean, it was clear. So the next question is from again Dinesh. So from a carbon offset program, the burden will get passed to the end customer. For example, airline carbon offset will get added to the fare, which would have an impact to the economic growth. What is the alternative? I think these are all trade-off questions. Like, I mean, you had a graph where you had compared, or you had kind of correlated the I mean, with every half a degree rise in global temperature, what is the impact on economy? So I think there's a trade-off that we have to make, and I mean, I'm sure there is no black and white answer for this.
Yeah.
So we will move on. Next one is Santosh Kumar. Climate change being a global issue, unless we are able to pressurize the developed countries to reduce the per capita carbon footprint, is it advisable to be overactive at a local level? What is which is adversely affecting the progress of developing societies? So examples are the Trump pulling out of Paris Agreement. So I think we covered this, like the burden has to be borne by the developed countries, and they have to support the developing and least developed countries. So I think we'll move on.
I think it's a very interesting question. I just would like to answer it very briefly, because there is a huge debate between within the development community or development professional communities that we should not act proactively at a state level or at a local self-government for highly ambitious global climate change debates, because anyway developed countries are going to exploit the remaining carbon budget. So that's something. It's a never-ending debate. But what I feel is that whatever we can do at a personal level or at a local self-government level, we should do. That's just for a kind of a satisfaction that we have done our part for as a justice to the future generations to come. And apart from US being pulled out from Paris Agreement, there are a lot of developed countries. Even the European Union is actively funding different projects in many parts of the developing world, where we try to kind of ensure that technology transfer from the developed countries, and even the financial support. I personally work on such a project where the European Union is funding the implementation of Paris Agreement in India. And I think this project is supporting many state governments and the Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change to achieve the targets that is being committed under Paris Agreement.
Okay. The next question is related to the disaster management. So it is from Indu Kumar. So the question is, don't we need flood mapping models which can predict vulnerabilities for the rivers or coastal areas?
I think we already have flood maps prepared, but based on the historic data till 2015. As I said in the slides, we have a panchayat level, local level flood vulnerability maps available now, which will eventually help the local level planning in terms of disaster risk reduction, where the every household will have a clear understanding about the vulnerabilities in their neighborhood. So we need more scientific data, even in terms of rainfall, temperature, the kind of if we need a local level rainfall prediction, we need more number of rain gauges in the state where we can get enough data to predict the future climate events. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, question is from Gopi Krishnan. So along with or after the disaster management plan, do we aim to do a disaster avoidance plan, something at grassroots to reverse the climate change?
So basically that's come to the state action plan on climate change, because at the state level, we need to have a consensus on the various climate action policies that we have to decide as a state government. Because we are also thriving for a local area climate action plan where every panchayat and every local self-government will have a climate action plan that will eventually term it as a disaster prevention plan or disaster prevention action plan, as Gopi Krishnan mentioned. So that has to be first from the state level, that has to happen. Then only the local self-governments or the panchayats can prepare their own local action plans. Because if a panchayat aspires to become a carbon neutral panchayat or a local self-government, they cannot go beyond very limited strategies, because a panchayat or a local self-government cannot implement an e-mobility action plan or a complete renewable energy action plan. They have a lot of limitations as a panchayat or as a local self-government. So that has to start. So there has to be a balance between the state level actions and the local level actions. Yeah, so it has to start from the state first, and then kind of the local self-government action plan should adhere to or tie up with the state action plans.
Okay. The next question is from Santosh. So, Santosh Kumar. So, what development do you think in the near future will contribute the most in reducing the carbon emission?
So, as I said, the basic idea or the fundamental concept is to decouple the emissions from the economic growth. We have to we need economic growth, and we need to follow a development trajectory that is decoupled with the emissions. So, if you ask what is the development activity, what should be that ideal developmental activity that will ensure that there will be more reductions than the emissions? So I'll have to look at traditional practices, farm practice, or indigenous crop varieties, or resilient cultivation practices, or even ecosystem-based adaptation strategies, like going for nature-based solutions rather than going for engineering solutions. So we can either prevent a landslide by constructing a retaining wall, or either we can do a slope stabilization by afforestation of, or stabilizing that slope by natural vegetation growth, or geofiber, or even geotextile for preventing bank erosion, river erosion in the. So it's again decoupling that economic concept of that. So there are concepts of, or the philosophies of degrowth, where we decouple. The GDP is not actually has nothing to do with the emission reduction. So that we have to switch from that traditional development concept or the development ideology that has been in the forefront. So it's just relooking in the development concepts altogether.
Okay. So next I'll read a few opinions or statements that had come through. So maybe if there's anything more you want to add, you can do.
Yeah.
So first one is from Indu Kumar. So for the disaster handling, we need a single agency to disseminate information and guidance rather than depending on multiple TV channels filling in. Okay. The other opinion is on again reducing emission and pollution. So this is from Girish. So Girish says, can't we go in for multi-level mitigation, basically making use of the MSW to make fuels which would make the use of fossil fuels less. Also, the GHG emission will become lower as the methane will be trapped and used. So there's another comment from Jain, which says that secondary impacts mitigation methods would give warning bell to even Panchayat. But how, as a local government at ground level, can influence the primary causes of global warming? May be very limited. Managing waste and flood management are not even in the hands of panchayats. Needs state level policy and planning to manage. The development can't be blocked by over-speccing the requirement. Sustainable development would give growth and development of society at the same time, protecting environment. So I think this is something that we covered in detail. The next question is from Harindranath. So his question is about the public transport system in Hong Kong. So he's checking whether you have done any study on the Hong Kong public transport system where 90% of the population use that. And it is operated through a real estate infrastructure, one of the most profitable public transport system in the world. Kerala and India always looks to the west, but there are many sustainable examples in the Far East, especially on public transport. Effective public transport system can help Kerala. What is your view?
Yeah, I completely agree with that observation because if we look at the case studies in Singapore as well, even in Hong Kong, their strength in public transport always ensure that people won't go for their private vehicles. In Singapore, even if you have money and even if you have that kind of resources for buying an private car, the governance policy doesn't allow you to do that. You have to kind of purchase a parking slot as well in the city in order to buy a car. So parking lot costs more than the car. So, but in Kerala or in India, we don't have that kind of governance restriction when it comes to the access to resources. If you have money, you can buy as many cars as you want. So just quoting an example from Delhi, when we implemented that odd even scheme in Delhi to decongest the roads, many families had 2 cars or 3 cars with both even and odd registration numbers. So actually that didn't make any difference at the end of the day in terms of total number of cars on the streets. So it's basically a governance question in terms of strengthening our public transport. How can we do it, or how to ensure that our even existing private bus networks in Kerala or even in rural areas, how to optimize optimize the ridership in KSRTC, because KSRTC, we always hear that it's in huge loss. How to kind of revamp the user expectations in using the public transport in Kerala is a very interesting aspect to study. As he said, there are a lot of best practices in Asian countries to look upon and learn from.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to add on to that, I think right now we are discussing about a high-speed rail from Trivandrum to Kasaragod. So again, like the question is, should we look at such ambitious projects, or should we be looking at more, what do you call, MEMU kind of intercity trains, which has higher frequency, and then probably instead of covering Trivandrum to Kasaragod in 4 hours or 5 hours, even if it takes a couple of hours more, is it going to be more useful? Or, I mean, what is a cost benefit analysis is one part that needs to be clearly understood.
Yeah.
The second thing, I think, just to add on to what you said, it's a classic case of degrowth. Like there's no point in doing odd, I mean, if there is no disincentive to buy a car, then people will, I mean, the affluent people will anyway buy 2 or 3 or how many or number of cars. They will still not depend on public transport. So, and for a country like India to introduce a disincentive to purchase a car or a motor vehicle would mean agreeing to degrowth. So again, there's a trade-off there which we have to look at. Just moving on. So there's one comment from Suresh. So Suresh MG. So in a way, he's objecting to the statement that Cochin Airport is carbon neutral, because what he's saying is that it comes at a huge cost to KSCB, because they actually use solar power during the off-peak time, and then take power from KSCB during the peak load time. So anyway, we'll not discuss that. It's clear. So then so there's one question from Bindu. So the question is, is there any connection between climate change and pandemics?
Yeah.
Do you know anything about it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically the pandemic or the zoonotic diseases that caused due to. It's again linked to but in terms of COVID, it's still unclear, or it's still not mutual or globally. There are a lot of debates that happening over the origin of COVID virus, but basically the biodiversity loss or the changes that is happening in our ecosystems due to the increasing temperature or the changes in the climatic patterns, the risk of pandemics are increasing. It's basically linked to the biodiversity and habitat loss that is due to the changes in temperature and the rainfall patterns. So even though we cannot link it directly with the climate change, it's a kind of indirect impact or a kind of a cumulative impact of climate change. So basically, it's a cycle that's biodiversity loss is being caused by human activities or the kind of unregulated developmental activities that is again contributing to the climate change, and also climate change triggers this biodiversity loss. It also increases the events of even species extinction or the habitat loss. So it's kind of a mutually exclusive debate, but yeah, there are a lot of published studies on which it's clearly justified that the climate change and the biodiversity loss is contributing to pandemics, but not clearly linked. In case of COVID, it's not clearly proven, but yes, climate change contributes to pandemics. It's the bottom line is that.
Yeah, I think one study that I've read is that the zoonotic diseases are triggered by distress in animals.
Animals as well.
Yeah. So basically, they are distressed because of extreme climate, and that kind of causes viral or the viruses to jump out of the body. Anyway, I'm not an expert in that. So, but there was a study that I'd seen that zoonotic diseases are triggered by climate change and distress, which is caused.
I think I'll just make a brief comment on the disaster information dissemination. One observation made by some participants. So basically, the State Disaster Management Authority is responsible for public dissemination of the weather alerts. So, but KSDMA or the Kerala State Disaster Management Authority doesn't make these observations. Indian Meteorological Department (IMD) owns the weather stations in Kerala or all around the world, all around the India, and they give the warning messages to KSDMA, and the KSDMA makes it locally specific and in Malayalam, and even the channels interprets this message in different ways. But the news channels or the media is being supplemented, or the KSDMA give information to the medias. So basically, the information channel is uniform, but the media tries to interpret it in different ways. Even they try to create panic for a yellow alert, but there might not be that much of danger from a yellow rainfall alert. But whenever we say that there is yellow alert in 14 districts, they try to kind of create a panic situation. But again, people lose trust in these kind of alerts because of the inefficiency in the alert messages. Because whenever we have a red alert, we may have a very sunny day. But if it is a green alert or if it is a yellow alert, we may have a torrential rainfall. So that again happens during due to the inefficiency in terms of the prediction or the modeling or the forecasting of rainfall in Kerala. Yeah.
Okay, so there's another question from Gopi. I think it's partly answered. So don't you think larger transports are to be made more efficient and reliable so that people will find it easier for transportation? Especially with COVID, people have learned to stay at home and do things. So I think, yeah, we'll just pass that question. I mean, we have already answered that.
Yeah,
Then,
one aspect of public transport that Kerala is being exploring is the inland water transport or the water metro.
yes,
That is something very potential area of mass transport in Kerala.
yeah. Then there are again comments from Suresh. I mean, he is talking about the CL. So we discussed that. So there's one question from Niranjan. How should we prioritize? I mean, I think we covered this, like who's in a hurry to reach Trivandrum from Kasargod in 4 hours. So we we covered that. Then so there's one question from Ajit Kumar. So he is asking a question. Can you elaborate artificial carbon sinks? Briefly explain methodologies adopted generally.
Okay, so artificial carbon sinks are kind of replacing solutions for the natural carbon sinks. So we have a natural forest, or we can create an artificial forest, not with the regular plants or not with the regular trees, but carbon sucking instruments, or we call it as a direct air capture technologies, or even carbon capture and storage in the geological formations. So basically, these are very highly investment oriented, are highly money intensive solutions for removing carbon dioxide from atmosphere. So there are a lot of research happening on negative emission technologies or carbon direct air capture or direct carbon removals from the atmosphere through technological solutions like artificial forest, or an artificial forest may be kind of in 1 acre of land with carbon sucking instruments. So that's basically kind of do the photosynthesis in a synthetic manner, just removing carbon dioxide from atmosphere and storing it in the geological formation. So that's in India we are not in a situation to discuss this because it's highly investment oriented. When we go for international conferences, there are a lot of research happening and pilot scale implementation happening in Europe or even in US in terms of artificial carbon sinks. Yeah.
Yeah, the other question has been again from Ajit. Any study has been done by GIZ regarding pre and post COVID GHG emission and its impact of economic growth, especially in India?
Not exclusively by GIZ, but there are a lot of studies published by other research think tanks on the emission reductions that has been observed during the COVID crisis and due to the national lockdowns in many countries. So an interesting observation is that only 17% reduction in global GHG emissions is being observed till May due to the COVID crisis. But that emission reduction is not going to favor in terms of any long-term climate benefits because this is a very temporary phenomena. In many parts of the world, the business as usual scenario is already started in Europe. If you take Germany or in any parts of some parts of Europe, the things are back to normal. So the regular economic activities will follow. And even in India or in other parts of the world, once the lockdown restrictions are over, once the vaccine is there, we are going to see a sudden surge in the emissions because we are going to hit because there are going to be an economic stimulus packages in place to kind of recover from this badly impacted economic situation. So once this economic stimulus packages are in place, it's going to be a sudden surge in the emissions that is being reduced for the time being. So there are a lot of discussions in terms of how does this economic stimulus packages should benefit long-term climate targets by ensuring that these investments are made in very climate responsive manner, or in order to kind of this window of opportunities rightly used to reduce future emissions. Yeah.
Okay, so there's one question from Derek Davis. So he's asking about the environment impact analysis study that was. So the question is, the governments are relaxing environment laws to boost economic activities. even during the pandemic situation. So like EIA that was released recently in India. So what is your opinion on that?
So basically, what's the legality of all these environmental initiatives is that EIA was the guiding principle, or environmental impact assessment was the only legally uh, binding instrument to control environmental degradation in India. So even EIA is kind of legitimizing the environmental destruction. There are a lot of arguments on that line. Again, we are trying to dilute the existing legally legitimizing EIA. And there is one ironical aspect of new proposed EIA recommendation is that for the solar power projects, there is no need to carry out an environmental impact assessment study because it's going to benefit climate change or boost the climate action. But the controversial part, or even the irony of not doing EIA for solar power projects is that large-scale solar power projects may or will have severe environmental impacts on the ecosystem. So if you take the recent example of the solar power plant that is being commissioned in Madhya Pradesh, which is supposed to be the second largest in India. So for that, but this new EIA norms is going to backfire the investments in renewable energy or even in the environment sector, even in climate action policies, because World Bank or any development banks have their strict norms of adhering to international norms and even environmental impact assessment norms to invest in such projects. So skipping that or diluting that won't going to benefit the development process or even the climate action policies in India. So there may be kind of backfiring happens in terms of investments because international funding agencies have a very strict rule of investing in environmental friendly projects. So even skipping environmental impact assessment for a large scale solar project won't do any good thing to the current environmental policy regulations in India.
Okay, so yeah, maybe I think we will quickly go through the next few questions. So this is again from Bindu. So is there any specific preventive disaster management plan for Kerala? What are the periodic measures being taken? I think this was partly covered. Maybe we can again come back to it if it is not. Then there's a question from Girish. So why don't we try to use methane generated from MSW as fuel for mobility? Do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll just quickly touch upon these both questions. The kind of the current institutional mechanism for disaster management in India, in Kerala, is that we have a state disaster management authority and we have a state disaster management plan at the state level, and we have a district disaster management authority chaired by the district collector at the district level, and we have a district disaster management plan. And now we are downscaling it to the panchayat level. Panchayat disaster management plans I already showed the map of one of the panchayat in Thrissur. That is the first time in India where we have a local self-government level disaster management plans. And coming on to the next question on the methane being generated from the municipal solid waste management systems, and again using it for fuel purposes, it's a very potential area where we can explore the technologies that can actually, when we come to the waste to energy plants in Kerala or in anywhere in the world, it's basically kind of a promoting centralized waste management in cities or in, but that centralized waste management has a lot of other environmental impacts, like burning, how much methane is being generated, how much methane can be captured, or how much methane can be converted into a fuel that is good enough to produce that is good enough to use it as a fuel. But again, when it comes to the centralized waste management facilities, it involves kind of unsegregated waste collection from the source and transporting it to that facility. That involves a lot of transportation cost and again carbon intensive processes. But when we have a decentralized success model of source segregated waste management systems in Kerala or many local self-governments, why should we bother about going for a centralized facility? That's the question.
Okay. So, did you answer the question on why don't we use methane generated from MSW as fuel for mobility?
Yes. I think he's referring to the waste to energy plants
Okay,
where
okay,
we
yeah.
can actually generate methane from the waste MSW plants, but that involves again
Underlies, yeah.
underlying emission footprints. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So
So there's one question from Derek. So he's asking, what is the role of NGOs like GIZ in sustainable development? Maybe you can take that as your last question because that's that's
yeah,
what you're currently
yeah,
doing. So
yeah.
then CG Thomas has a question on the solar panels. So basically, this is something that we covered. So basically, life is around 30 to 35 years. After this period, how do we dispose these panels? So I think we briefly covered that. There's one question from, or there's one comment from Usha. Bhutan follows gross national happiness, and this explains the focus of development. We have not started discussing this in Kerala. So, I mean, are you aware of any such discussion or debates in Kerala?
As of now, we are not. We have not initiated the discussions on gross national happiness index or happiness index. Even there is no kind of a uh, state level indices for happiness indexing. But if you do the comparison of Kerala state as a national average to many European countries or even Bhutan, if you can do that assessment of the happiness index in Kerala, then we may be at par with the Scandinavian countries in Europe. Even in terms of human development index or even in terms of access to basic services, we are at par with the European countries. So we haven't done any sort of such studies at the state level. I think that is something underlies the importance of decoupling economic growth from emissions and focusing more on happiness index than the GDP. So
Yeah, I
that is
think
a
it's
very
more a,
interesting area
yeah.
of the qualitative assessment of the quality of life in Kerala.
Yeah, I think, I mean, this whole rush to create new business opportunities and ventures, I mean, following the GDP model is probably what is in question. Yeah, anyway. So there's another comment from Charles. So have we taken steps to educate our younger generation the importance of emission related issues right from the school level, continuing all the way up to graduation? I remember learning a bit in secondary school level, but nothing for undergrad program. So basically, I think we just have the draft, whatever, DNEP out, right? So is there any plan at all to educate the next generation on such matters? Because I don't also remember taking any such discussion serious during, I mean, our learning years.
I think I have very successful examples for school students initiatives in terms of climate action from past year experiences of associating with Malayalam Manorama's Nallapadam initiative in Kerala, where we connected with the 10 lakh school students in terms of enhancing climate actions in their schools. So that sensitization aspects are running, not the state-run initiatives, but there are multiple NGOs and multiple other non-state players being actively involved in sensitizing the school children or the younger generation in terms of climate change impacts, because this generation uh, is going to feel or going to experience most climate change impacts that's going to happen in Kerala in the coming 10 or 20 years. So they have been very proactive, they have been very curious, and they have been very enthusiastic in terms of understanding the science behind climate change. Even the Fridays for Future campaign run by Greta Thunberg, or Fridays for Future campaign, there has been a lot of Kerala, we had a lot of Malayali Greta Thunbergs in Kerala, where they've been very vocal against not having a state action plan on climate change in Kerala, or not having concrete policies at the state level for addressing climate change issues. And I think with new education policy in place, and I think that even introducing the concepts of disaster management in the curriculum was in discussion during 2018 and 2019, I think. and modifying the SCRT textbook materials. I think so. In the coming years, or in the revising the curriculum, the climate change and the disaster management aspect is going to be a vital part of the school education.
Okay, so again, a question from Ajit. So huge investment is required in infrastructure for achieving the target economic growth in India, as capital investment is very high to promote and implement renewable energy. Can we go for cost-effective, eco-friendly actions for infrastructure development? I think we have kind of covered this in multiple questions, so we'll move on.
I think I just to add to that what we have already covered. KIFBI, Kerala Infrastructure Investment Fund Board in Kerala, has been actively involved in issuing green bonds and promoting disaster resilient infrastructure projects in Kerala. Again, looking at because KIFBI is being a very pivotal or very key financial instrument in Kerala in the future rebuilding processes. So KIFBI is also looking at the climate mitigation aspects of the infrastructure. And there is a national level coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure, CDRI, being spearheaded by India at the global level. So I think we are looking at climate proofing the existing infrastructure and the upcoming infrastructure projects.
Okay. So the next question is on goods movement through rivers. So we covered that, like inland transport can be done through waterways.
Yeah.
Then there's, I think it's more a comment. I mean, by less consumption, individuals can contribute to reduction in carbon emission. This is by Ajmal Basha, which is correct. Then Usha has a question: can increasing food production organically in Kerala help in carbon neutrality? I think we covered that. I mean, there's also active effort in that direction with respect to the Subiksha Kerala or initiative.
And in terms of organic food production, I think I can quote the example of initiatives done by Tunnel, the NGO that I have been part of, where we try to kind of link the organic farmers to the consumers through a platform called Organic Bazaar. We have to ensure that the farmers are being paid a good or more price for their organic products, because that is safe for the children, and that is being cultivated with suffering a huge loss because of not applying any pesticides or any genocides to protect it from the pest attack. So the farmers we have to ensure that farmers are being paid a more premium price for the organic products as well, because otherwise these farmers won't be able to produce more organic products, because if they don't get that economic feasibility, or if it is not economically feasible, they will definitely go for pesticides or any other chemicals for improving their productivity.
Yeah, so I think I mean, this question is from Vijay Kumar, so it's more allegorical one. So what he's saying is Kerala being a less industrial state, aren't we more like passive smokers discussing tobacco production and hazards? So yeah, I mean, we kind of covered that, stating that we cannot look at it that way, and we have to
actually it's very ironical that those who contribute to this whole global crisis or whole this climate emergency are not that much vulnerable to this impacts of climate change. Those who not contribute, or those who don't even contribute nothing, like even that again the socioeconomic aspects or the gender lens will come to the place, where the most poorer sections of the society or the most are the most vulnerable society. So those who don't contribute, or those who don't even make any contribution to the whole global emissions are the ones who suffer from it most. So that's an irony.
Yeah. So I think with that, we have kind of concluded the questions. So there was one question on what is the role of organizations like GIZ in climate change. And
so first of all, GIZ is not a non-profit or an NGO, it's a development agency. So GIZ actually supports the implementation of international projects in India with financial support from European Union, even the German Environment Ministry, or the German Economic Ministry. Even so, it basically facilitates the technology transfer from a developed country or a developing economy to support the initiatives in India. Or if the project that I'm working on right now is the strategic partnership for implementation of the Paris Agreement. So we have Paris Agreement targets, and we need support from developed countries to achieve those targets. So this particular project is being funded by European Union in all G20 countries, where the European Union is hand-holding technology transfer and even supporting the institutions in other countries. In this project has been implemented in Argentina, South Africa, and all the other G20 countries, where that the basic idea of transfer of financial and technological solutions from a developed economy to the developing or the least developed countries. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was a very, very good session, Nidhin. Thank you. And thanks to all the viewers who have logged on to Facebook to be with us for this particular program. So we will also be, this recording will obviously be available on FB. We will also be sharing a YouTube link to this particular video so that you can further share it or refer on this matter at a later stage. Thank you all. So we sign off now.